She started with $900 and a fax machine and became America's first black woman to own a billion-dollar company. Janice Bryant Howroyd grew up as one of 11 children in a small, segregated town in North Carolina, the granddaughter of sharecroppers. When she left home with just $2,500 in her pocket, she had no investors, no safety net, and no roadmap for success. Today, her company, ActOne Group, operates in 33 countries and serves over 17,000 clients. But none of it was handed to her. From the front office of a small rug shop, she built every piece of her empire on her own terms. This is how she actually did it. Born into a town that wanted her to stay small. Janice Bryant Howroyd was born on September 1, 1952, in Tarboro, North Carolina. She was the fourth of 11 children, and life inside that household moved with the discipline of a well-run operation. There was very little money, but there was enormous structure. Her parents ran their 13-person home the way serious people run serious things. Everyone had a role, everyone was accountable. Her mother assigned older siblings to mentor younger ones, and Janice was given her sister Sandy as her appointed guardian. Sandy was responsible for making sure Janice's homework was done, her hair was neat, and her thinking was in line with what the family expected. You could not drift in that house. You were accountable to the person above you and responsible for the person below you. That structure, as ordinary as it seemed, was the foundation for everything she would later build. The entrepreneurial thread ran through the family even before Janice arrived. Her grandparents had run a makeshift barbecue restaurant out of their home. They built something from nothing with what they had available. Nobody handed them a storefront or a loan. They cooked food, sold it to people who wanted it, and kept going. Janice watched how that worked, even as a small child, and filed it away. Tarboro itself was another kind of education. The town was still deeply segregated. The Bryant family navigated it with a careful, deliberate kind of optimism that Janice later described as not naive, but chosen. Her parents understood the climate. They did not pretend it was fair, but they pushed their children toward possibility rather than parking them in front of the threat. Then came the test. When Janice reached high school age, her parents enrolled her in Tarboro's previously all-white school. She was among the first African-American students to participate in the desegregation of her town's school system. On her very first day, a teacher stood at the front of the classroom and explained why people of African descent were best suited for slave labor and why affirmative action was bad for the country. Janice sat in that room and listened to all of it. She went home shaken. She begged her father to let her transfer. He heard everything she had to say and handed the decision back to her. He was not going to carry this for her. She had to decide who she was going to be when the room was not built for her. She thought it through, walked back into that school and stayed. She did not just endure it, she excelled. That decision, to return to the school that had tried to define her, turned out to be the first of many times Janice would walk into a space that was not built for her and find a way to make it work anyway. She won a full scholarship to North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, where she studied English and humanities. She later earned a master's degree from the University of Maryland and a doctorate from North Carolina State University. The degrees mattered, but the thing that drove her was never a credential. It was a deep, practiced understanding that what you build with your judgment and your hands is yours in a way that a certificate on the wall never quite is. The vacation she never went home from. In 1976, Janice packed her things and headed to Los Angeles. She had her sister Sandy's address, $900 in her pocket, and a return ticket she would never use. She came out west on what was supposed to be a vacation. Then Sandy asked her to stay, and Janice looked around at a city that was nothing like Tarboro and decided she would. Sandy's husband was Tom Noonan, who worked in the entertainment business. He offered Janice a temporary job at Billboard magazine. Walking into that office for the first time was a different world entirely. Recording artists in the hallways, music executives taking meetings, people whose names were on album covers sitting across from people in suits. For someone who grew up in a small, segregated southern town, it was almost impossible to absorb. But Janice was not there to be impressed. She was there to learn. And what she learned almost immediately was not what she expected. The entertainment industry had attracted a certain kind of support worker. Aspiring actors, aspiring screenwriters, people who had taken office jobs just to stay in the city and hope for a break. Their hearts were always somewhere else. The job in front of them was a placeholder, and the companies depending on them were paying the price for that mismatch every single day. Janice showed up differently. She had come from a household where you did the work in front of you, fully and without apology. She knew what an office needed to function. She could identify a workflow problem and fix it before anyone asked. Tom Noonan noticed. The executives around him noticed. People started telling her she should not be working for someone else. She should be running something herself. She heard that piece of advice from enough people that she stopped dismissing it and started asking what it would actually look like to act on it. She spent 2 years at Billboard building contacts, watching how business moved at close range, and saving everything she could. By 1978, she had set aside $600 of her own and borrowed $900 from her mother, total $1,500. She found a small office with a Beverly Hills address she could not really afford. She took the front room of a rug shop, bought a telephone and a fax machine, and opened a staffing agency called ActOne Personnel Services. She later told people she thought she was Judy Jetson when she got that fax machine. It was September 1978. She was 26 years old. No investors, no partners, no guarantee a single client would ever call. The first client and the idea nobody else was selling. The staffing industry already existed when Janice entered it. Los Angeles had employment agencies all over the place. The standard model was simple and cold. A company called in, described what they needed, the agency sent a candidate with a photo and a rate. If it worked, great. If not, try again. The worker was inventory, a product to be moved from shelf to shelf. Janice looked at that model and saw the gap immediately. Nobody was treating the job seeker as the most important person in the transaction, but the job seeker was the whole thing. If you placed someone badly in a role that did not fit who they were or what they wanted to do, they would not stay. The company would come back unhappy, the worker would be miserable, and everyone would lose time, money, and trust. Every bad placement was a signal that the model was broken at its center. She built ActOne around one idea. If the employee is placed well and is genuinely happy in the role, the company they work for will do well. The worker was not a commodity. The worker was the point. Her first client was Billboard magazine. Tom Noonan gave her the first call, and she delivered. She found them committed, focused workers who actually wanted to be there. The difference was immediately visible. Those companies referred her to other companies. That referral network was her only marketing strategy. No advertising budget, just results. In those early months, she ran the entire operation alone. Every phone call, every candidate screen, every placement, every follow-up. No team, no investor writing checks to cover the gaps while she figured it out. She bootstrapped every step of the growth from the revenue she earned. The business funded the next version of itself, one placement at a time. She turned a profit in her first year. Not a large one, but enough to confirm the model was real and she could serve it. She hired her first employee, moved into a proper office, and began expanding across industries in the Los Angeles area. Healthcare companies, law firms, financial offices, corporate headquarters. Each one a new proof point that her applicant-first model was producing results that the old commodity-based model could not match. Her mother had spent years teaching her to make a lot from very little. She was doing exactly that, one careful placement at a time, in a city that had not been expecting someone like her to build anything in it. From staffing agency to HR tech powerhouse. Through the 1980s, ActOne grew steadily. Revenue climbed every single year. The client base expanded beyond entertainment into law, finance, healthcare, and corporate America. She added staff, opened new offices, and began building the internal systems that would let the company operate at scale without losing the personal attention to each candidate that had separated ActOne from the start. In 1989, she opened ActOne's first international office in Ontario, Canada. She had already developed a framework for what cross-border expansion actually required. She called it globalization. Globalization, as she explained it, handles the regulatory and financial infrastructure of entering a new market. Globalization is what happens once you are inside. Understanding the local culture, the professional norms, the specific relationship dynamics that businesses in that area actually depend on, and then shaping your service around those realities rather than expecting the market to adapt to you. ActOne did not open overseas offices and run them like they were in Los Angeles. It went into each market, learned what that market needed, and built around it. That was not a small distinction. Large American companies had failed in international markets for decades by doing exactly the opposite. Janice did not make that mistake. Then the internet arrived, and with it, the moment that would transform ActOne from a staffing agency into something else entirely. In 1995, ActOne became one of the first staffing agencies in the world to launch a website. The site was appleowned.com, and at a time when most businesses were still debating whether the internet was worth taking seriously, ActOne was already there. Job seekers could find the company online. Employers could reach out directly. The tech boom of the mid to late 1990s created enormous demand for skilled workers, and ActOne had positioned itself exactly where that demand was flowing. But she did not stop at having a website. She kept building. In 1996, she launched document scanning systems to help corporations digitize and manage their physical records. In 1998, she founded A-Check America, a background screening and drug testing company. Employers were demanding that kind of verification before every new hire, and the process of coordinating it through multiple third parties was slow, expensive, and full of gaps. A-Check centralized it, and it gave her clients one more reason to stay inside the ActOne ecosystem rather than look for alternatives. The internal HR technology infrastructure that had been quietly developing inside ActOne eventually became its own company, AgileOne, a proprietary workforce technology and vendor management platform built for enterprise clients. This was the pivot that changed the scale of everything. Janice had realized something that most staffing agency founders never do: human capital scales linearly, but software scales exponentially. By building AgileOne, she shifted ActOne from a service-based agency into a legitimate HR tech powerhouse, and she locked enterprise clients in for the long haul. A company that uses AgileOne to manage its entire external workforce, tracking compliance, vendor performance, and labor spend across dozens of suppliers, does not simply switch that off and start over with a competitor. The switching costs are enormous. The data is embedded. ActOne was no longer just filling roles. It was running the system that large corporations use to manage all of their roles. That is a completely different kind of leverage. Crossing $1 billion the slow, unglamorous way. There is a version of this story where the billion-dollar moment arrives with a press conference, a dramatic announcement, and a single transformative deal. That is not what happened here. The billion came from 36 years of correct daily decisions, each one building on the last, until the accumulation of all of it crossed a threshold that most of the outside world had not been paying attention to. Throughout the 1990s, ActOne grew its annual revenue by at least 10% every single year. Every time a client identified a new need, she built a solution, rather than sending them to someone else. The company kept making itself harder to leave. New divisions were not expanded for its own sake. They were specific answers to specific problems her clients were already paying to solve. By the 2000s, ActOne had offices in the United Kingdom, Denmark, Brazil, and more than a dozen other countries. The company that had started as a one-woman operation in the front room of a Beverly Hills rug shop was now a multinational workforce solutions enterprise. And it was still entirely privately owned. Not a single share had ever been sold to an outside investor. In 2013, President Barack Obama appointed Janice as the U.S. Ambassador of Energy at the White House. The following year, in 2014, Black Enterprise magazine officially recognized Janice Bryant Howroyd as the first African-American woman to own and operate a billion-dollar company in the United States. It was 36 years after she had opened that fax machine. Nobody who had been watching her build was surprised. The milestone was just the math finally catching up to what she had actually built. Forbes listed her among America's richest self-made women. BET named her their first ever Honors Entrepreneur of the Year, and she got back to work. By 2018, the combined subsidiaries of the ActOne Group generated $1.1 billion in net sales, according to Forbes. More recent estimates place total annual revenue as high as $3.4 billion, all of it bootstrapped and owned outright. Not a dollar of it came from venture capital or a public offering. How ActOne's 3 revenue pillars actually make the money. People hear the words staffing company and picture a local hiring office with a front desk and a filing cabinet. That is not what ActOne is. It is a multi-billion-dollar workforce ecosystem, and understanding how the money actually flows through it explains exactly why it has been almost impossible to compete with. The first stream is the original engine. Apple One handles full-time and temporary job placement across corporate, legal, financial, and administrative sectors. Allswell covers healthcare staffing, placing workers in hospitals, clinics, and medical facilities. The model is straightforward. ActOne charges companies a percentage of the placed worker's salary. But because Janice built the entire business around treating candidates like talent rather than inventory, the best workers come to her first. That means her clients get better people. And better people means she can charge premium rates that her competitors simply cannot justify. The second stream is where the real tech money lives. Large corporations do not hire through a single agency. They manage dozens of vendors at the same time, and coordinating all of that is expensive, slow, and messy. ActOne is Janice's answer to that problem. It is a proprietary enterprise software platform that lets massive companies manage their entire external workforce in one place. Compliance tracking, vendor performance, labor spend, onboarding workflows, all of it in a single dashboard. ActOne is no longer just sending people to fill jobs. It owns the software those companies use to manage every worker they have. That is a completely different kind of revenue, and it is what pushed this business from a staffing agency into a genuine tech empire. The third stream is what locks the whole thing together. Every corporate hire requires background screening and drug testing before day one. Instead of letting her clients go to a separate vendor for that, Janice built A-Check Global to handle it entirely in-house. It speeds up onboarding, eliminates delays, and adds a highly profitable recurring revenue stream on top of every single placement. The client never needs to go anywhere else. Finding the candidate, clearing them for work, managing the workforce technology, all of it runs through ActOne. And that is exactly why this ecosystem gets harder to leave the longer a client stays inside it. That was not a lucky outcome. That was the plan. The 4 principles that built the billion. Most people looking at this story search for the single turning point. The lucky break, the right connection, the year everything clicked. Janice Bryant Howroyd's story does not give you that. There was no single door that opened. There were thousands of small, well-made decisions stacked on top of each other over 4 decades. And the result of that compounding is what people now call a billion-dollar company. She has been direct about the 4 core principles that guided her from the beginning. The first is preparation. The second is understanding the actual goal before you begin moving. The third is recognizing that the people around you, especially family, are part of your success, not separate from it. The fourth is gratitude at every stage, not just at the finish line. Those 4 things sound simple on a list. They are not simple to practice consistently over 36 years. Most people violate at least one under pressure. They move before they are ready because waiting feels like losing. They lose the goal in the noise of the day-to-day. They cut off the people who helped them once they stopped needing the help. And they rush through the good things already in front of them because the next milestone is always more urgent. Janice did none of that. And that is the part of this story that the people who try to copy the model almost always miss. She also said something to Forbes that gets right to the mechanics of why she could move so boldly. I didn't have a lot of what people typically have to start a business, but I did have a lot of intelligence. Sometimes, when you don't have anything, you can be bolder than someone who has something and is afraid to lose it. That boldness was not recklessness. It was the freedom that comes when the downside is already as low as it gets. When you have $2,500 and a fax machine, you make every call. That same energy never left her. She served on the Women's Leadership Board at Harvard Kennedy School. She joined the Los Angeles Economic Development Corporate Board. She sat on the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Board of Directors. She accepted the presidential appointments, wrote the books, gave the speeches, and still showed up the next day to run the company. Her mother once told her, "In order to be outstanding, sometimes you are just going to have to stand out." She first stood out as a black teenager walking back into a classroom that had tried to tell her she did not belong. She stood out as a 26-year-old black woman opening a staffing company in Beverly Hills with $1,500 in a fax machine. And she stands out now as the first African-American woman to build and own a billion-dollar company in the United States, without a single outside investor, without going public, and without selling who she was personally to become who she wanted to be professionally. Janice Bryant Howroyd left a sharecropper's town with $1,500 and a refusal to shrink. She built a billion-dollar tech empire the slow, unglamorous, disciplined way. And she did it without selling a single share to anyone. Everything you just watched was built from one correct decision at a time. So now, do you think putting the worker first is what truly separated ActOne from the crowd? Or was it the pivot into enterprise HR tech in the 1990s that actually built the empire? And could she have scaled even faster with venture capital? Or would outside money have changed the soul of the whole thing? Drop your answer in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story hits differently, hit that like button and subscribe to Black Status so you never miss what we put out next. We will see you in the next video.